The Winchester Model 71, basically a simplified 1886. It's essentially the same gun. It does not have a very straightforward takedown and reassembly sequence. And they've decided to make a separate video just to show you guys how this thing comes apart. It's also helpful in how to take an actual 1886 apart in terms of the order of it. This particular gun, we've done an episode on redoing the wood, redoing the checkering. We did an episode on redoing the metal. And now we're going to do just a straightforward take it apart, put it back together again. In the middle of this, we're going to have to make a tool to get the helical mainspring out of it. And that's pretty much all we're going to have to do, grind a couple of screwdrivers. So let's go take this thing apart. And then, well, as my apprentice would say, we don't get paid to take them apart. We get paid to put them back together again. Now, don't we? I usually start by removing anything extraneous. In this case, sling swivels. We'll just get them off the gun here. Now I'm at the back end grabbing that. I don't like sling swivels and like banging around on this because it messes up the wood. It does all kinds of stuff, all right? So step one here, I like to take the front end of the gun apart first because then we can grab the barrel here in the felt on the vise and spin it around, and I'll show you that. But okay, screw out. As we bring that, we don't want this to be ejected. Okay, that gives us the magazine spring, the follower. All right. The magazine tube on a 71 is screwed in, so this has to be unscrewed. And you can see it slowly advancing. If you have a problem unscrewing this, you just get a piece of metal that's about the inside diameter, just put it in, grab it in a vise and turn it, but you got to support the tube from the inside. So now the mag tube comes out and you can see the threads here. Now this gun's just been conserved, converted, and lubricated, so this thing should just kind of come apart. Here we're just going to bump out. And of all the screws on this gun when we reblued it, it was one of these that was the most messed up. So we'll put that there, and then I just got to go around and do the other side. Nose cap comes off. Fore end lifts clear. If you need to go the rest of the way, this can be driven out. Nope, doesn't want to go that way. It does want to go that way. Okay. So there we go. We've got the hanger. So now we have basically the entire front end of the gun on the bench. I'm not going to take the sights off this time, but this would be a good time to take the sights off. And what that's going to allow us to do is flip this thing over and trap it in the vise. By taking the front end of the gun off first, you can just see the corner of this felt pad here. I can back the vise off just a little bit, roll this around, and then retrap it, you see. So it allows me an all-angle presentation to be able to work on it. The only thing holding this entire rear end on this gun is one screw. That got modified in later versions, but in our particular case, there's just one screw doing all of the work. Okay, we'll get that nudged up. Now when we went in and redid this gun, we made this screw go down in that hole pretty tight to make sure it held everything on. Okay, so we can roll around this way and back that clear. Set that off to one side so that it doesn't get beat up. You just want that over there so it doesn't get beat up. So here's the real kicker in this whole thing. This helical mainspring right here is the bugaboo with this whole thing, all right? And the issue is there's a cassette in here in the back there that holds the spring, and then the strut goes through it. Okay, there's a strut that runs down through it. The strut's pushing up on the bottom of the hammer and it pumps. Unlike, say, a 1894 where you can pull, there's a screw up here, you can pull it out and you can drop the locking blocks and the lever and you can take all that apart and not have the fire control group fall out. You're not going to get that lucky here. You're going to have to take the entire fire control group out of this thing before you can even get the bolt out of it. Okay, wherever. This cassette, this is a piece of steel right here. You can see the top of it. And it goes down and it goes under this pin and it comes up to the trigger, and then there's a small helical spring that pushes forward on the trigger. I have tried to take this thing apart and then capture all of this with that cassette, and that's not how you got to do it. I'm holding this spring up with an English shotgun tool, and I've stuck this Allen key or anything I've got, and you stick it down in that hole, and it captures that spring, and it takes most of the weight off of this. Do you need this tool? No, but it sure helps to be able to get in between the spring and push it up. The big one I would tell you is have the gun captured so that if you come off of this, you're not leaving a great big gouge right up the side of the finish. You got to just be smarter than the game. But there is a screw hole, listen to me. There is a through hole drilled through the strut here. That same hole and this exact same helical spring arrangement is on the Pedersoli reproductions of 1886. It's on several of them. The Rossi has it. So it appears like what they call an 1886 was actually a copy of the mainspring setup on the 71. Well, once you get that trapped, I'm going to show you why you have to trap it. All right. So that screw right there is going to have to come out. This is not the screw that the hammer pivots on. There's a sleeve in here, and you can see that silver ring right there. There's a sleeve. And the elevator and the hammer and the outside of the bottom metal are all being captured by that sleeve. However, you cannot get that sleeve out from the back side. They've drilled a hole in it. So you get you a piece of piano wire here, right there, right? It's just a piece of piano wire. You might be able to use a paper clip for this, but I would have to tell you, I don't know if a paper clip is going to be strong enough to do what we got to do. Just bend a little U in the bottom of it like that. And then you go in the hole here, and I don't know where it is because I haven't looked at it. Where is it? There it is. So there's a hole in there, and that hook goes in, and as you do that, this will come out. And this is a sleeve, okay? So this sleeve has a hole in it, and that hole is what we hooked our tool into, like that, and we just grabbed it and drug it out, all right? So once that's apart, you see it didn't explode on us because we don't have any tension here on the mainspring, you see? So the whole gun did not explode, and we should just be able to walk this whole thing off the back. Here it goes. Okay. Here we go. So that fell out the back. This falls out the bottom, and the spring did not forcefully shoot itself across the room. Ask me how I know. So I've rolled the gun over now, and we have to take the loading gate off first. And the loading gate, unlike every other lever gun you've ever done, does not come in from the rear. It just mounts on the outside. So let me get that. Let me get this wood out of the way. All right. And we'll go in, and that screwdriver tip is too wide, you see. So I need to find a narrower screwdriver tip. And the entire loading gate assembly just comes off as one piece here, okay? And it's got a pretty strong spring in it. And if you want to take this further apart, you drive the pin and it'll all blow up, and then the spring, this lifts and slides out that way. No need to take this further apart. This is really self-explanatory, and you don't need it in a sequence video. This lever right here bumps up against this, and it keeps the lock and block from falling out the bottom of the gun. So you're going to need to eventually take that lever out in order to be able to get the gun the rest of the way apart. So we'll take this spring, this screw out right here. Okay, and you can see that this particular screw right here has a collar on it. So there's a collar right here. I'm going to get it where you can actually see it. Jeez, I'm trying to not drop it. There's a collar here, and this collar goes down inside that hole over the top of this stud. So when you take this off, you just got to make sure you keep this setup together, all right? And then that will allow this part here to drop out. I got to remember where we're at here. Here we go. That will drop out. There's some discussion I've been looking at about what order you take this out in, but this is just kind of where I want to take them out in, right? This is a split pin. As we pop on it, it'll just close up and drop out the back side. We've got to support this on the back side and leave a hole for it to go through. Put a brass punch on it and just drive it through like that. And once you drive it out, we have to go the rest of the way out. I need a slightly longer punch. Stand by. That will come out the bottom. And you wind up with a sleeve that went through that way and a split pin that came up from the bottom like that. And that holds all this together. And now that we have pulled out anything that's retaining these, the locking blocks just come out of the gun this way. And then that allows us to pull. Hang on a minute. We're going to realign the camera here. This is one of those things that's harder to show than it is to do. That's the roll pin, right? Not roll pin, but that's the pin that ordinarily in later Winchesters you would come in through the side of the receiver to get. That drops out, and when that drops out, you can take the lever out, and you can take the elevator out, the carrier out. Those come apart, and the inside of the gun comes out. And we basically have this to pieces. Now I'm going to get this back up in a vise and show you something about the bolt. But essentially we have taken everything out of the inside of the gun. There's a shell latch up inside here. That's all self-explanatory. That's not sequence. But it was how to get this out of the gun. That was the big problem. I mounted the lever and drove the pin back in, and I mounted the lever because I wanted to show something here. If you push the firing pin out, as you open the lever, see how the firing pin retracts? That's the out of battery interlock. Now, obviously, come all the way down here, who cares, because the bolt's all the way open. But as the bolt comes shut, that will allow the firing pin to come out. So the lever has to be all the way up before you get protrusion. Now, you can mechanically drop the hammer before that on this gun, but it won't matter because unless the bolt is locked in battery, it won't go off. So the ejector, you stack the spring on it, stack this collar on it, slide this up in here in one piece, and that should go in there, and you can see how that's spring loaded. Take the finger lever and make sure that you've got this thing in the right orientation. Yeah, that looks right. There's the top of the bolt. Here's the bottom of the retraction gizmo. And you can see that this cam actually pushes on that ejector and loads it up as you open the lever. So when it's sitting in there, it's not under a tremendous amount of tension, but as you open the lever, it pushes that out, you see, and tensions it. Brilliant design. I mean, this guy was uncanny. Okay. That's got to be pushed in. That's got to be inside the hole, and then that'll go right in. See? So you have to hold that in and run this down. Run this down until that's flush. Okay, so you can see how it tensions the spring when we open it, and it detensions the spring when it's shut. Good to know. All right, so here we go. This is my best guess. Lever comes in from the top, and you'll find the way it goes in. Now, the shell lifter, this has to be up inside of this. Right there. And then that goes up inside. Boom. Victory is this hole on the inside there is lined up with this hole, and we can basically get the lever shut. So we got the hard part of getting the internals in for now. The lock and block that goes on this side of the gun has this cutout in it for that retention lever. This one doesn't. It does not seem to matter which side this sleeve goes in. It doesn't seem to matter. So when we put the split pin back in, I don't think it really matters. So lock and block here comes in right there. It'll lock there, right? So this is where we are attempting to intercept right here. Is that hole. We are attempting to get this to hang on. So we're going to drop that lock and block, or that split pin in there, and that's going to tie this together, and then we come around the other side. Okay. And we do that. Okay. So now we have, now the carrier is still kind of floating around in there, so it's sort of locking us up. But now we have, and this was the brilliance of Browning. Browning figured out how to lock all this shut and get this out of the way for a 4570 cartridge and do it all on 90 degrees of lever throw. And that was his brilliance. All right, well, now that we've got that in, now we can put the block in that locks this. So I'm picking the carrier up here with my index finger. This is the orientation of the lock and block retention. I forget the exact name of this thing, but the name of it basically says lock and block retention gizmo. Stick that in there like that. And this edge right here is what keeps that block from falling out the bottom. When you do that, this lines up. So now the screw with the roller on it goes right in there and threads into this block. And what that roller does is that roller lets you tighten this screw down tight, but now you still have a rolling joint. He said joint. Give me a break. See, so this is free to move and is bouncing around, but that screw is good and tight. I'm supporting the locking block on this lead thing here. You could use a hammer, you could use anything, but this split pin, this thing is a bit of a pain in the butt to get running because it doesn't have very much of a, there's no angle on it. So all of the angle is the inside of this locking block. So when you put that on there, you got to give it a pretty good pop to get it running. Okay, and once you get that, the split part will collapse down inside. And now we're hanging on to the locking block with the split pin on this side, and we're right back to where we began again. This spring right here is what's supposed to push the trigger forward, but it's supposed to sit down in a little detent down in there. So we're going to bend that around the corner and set that spring down inside into that. We're going to bend that spring around the corner so that when we push it back, we don't crush it. So we'll stick that in there. Hang on a minute, I went a really weird angle. And that goes in that hole, and when it does it, this moves without crunching. Now, in order to keep this thing from getting in the way and popping out, we're just going to run a rubber band around it like that. And that will keep that spring from popping out of that cassette and leave this alone, okay? Very good. Wanted to bring that up. Eventually, this is going to wind up sliding up in here like this, and it's all going to go together, okay? So we captured the spring tension here. We captured it. So we can feed this up inside here, there. So now we've got the hammer laying on top of the carrier, and all this is essentially getting lined up around the center line of that pin, right? So now that brings us to putting this bottom on, and there's a hole here. That hole, the back end of this has to go inside that hole when we're putting it together. So as we feed this on, and we got to make sure then we got the carrier in there in the right spot too. Okay, get all that lined up. You got to drop that down so that that goes into that hole, right? So that's got to be down. And we'll just lightly tap this in, and we'll see that that's starting to load up a little bit. Okay, let me get that in and make sure it's going to go in that hole. There it goes. So now the tail of the hammer strut is inside that hole. We've got this pretty much lined up, and then I'm going to come up underneath it with a spud, which in this case I'm just going to use this screwdriver. Oh, wait a minute. I can actually use my assembly gizmo. We're going to come up inside that hole, and you can see here I can move the hammer around with this spud, right? So what I can do now is optically line that up, get this tube so that the hole's on the top, because we want to make it easier on the next guy, and I am the next guy. Okay, so that's going to go in there, and you just keep walking it around until everything lines up. Okay, so in this case, let me have my 2 ounce here. Let me have that little eBay one. Thank you. So in this case, I can just tap on this just a little bit while we're loading things. I'm not hitting it very hard. I'm just trying to find that spot where we got about 17 things that have to line up. Okay. I'm just walking around with it. We'll get it there. So what's it not going through? It's not going through the carrier. Okay, so maybe we move, there it is. So I moved the carrier a little bit, and that dropped down even further. All right. Now, we got this most of the way in. I'm going to go ahead and stick the screw through it. And we're going to see whether or not we can use this screw to line up whatever's left over on the other side there. And that should drag that in without a whole lot of hate and discontent. There we go. So now the threads are pulling that tube down the last little bit, and I'm not putting any effort on this screwdriver at all. So we're not wedging something in. We're not bludgeoning something in. We're just going down nice and easy. Okay, and then you can just take this thing out under duress. Just walk it and it'll pop out. That'll pop out. Right, the hammer comes back, but it doesn't cock because we have the hammer held back. Very good. Now, what I was talking about before was, if you have this thing out of battery, you don't have the handle all the way up. Firing pin is not allowed to protrude. In this particular iteration, you can drop the hammer. Now, the gun won't go off because the firing pin does not have access. See? Later on, they put disconnectors on here. They put little tabs sticking out on the 94s that said, you know, you had to have the handle all the way up, and that's not on this particular iteration of this gun. But there you go. That's, in my opinion, probably the quickest way to put this thing back together again without mucking up the finish. So now we can stick the stock back on this thing, put the stock bolt back in it, and then roll it up and put the front end back on it. We're checking here. You got to be very careful that you don't damage this inletting. because this is razor sharp. And all of this was inletted on a machine. None of this was done by hand. And if you look at it, you can actually see the scallops from the end cutter. The cutter was coming down this way. Neat, neat, neat. You see that? So that thing was following a cam, and it went around the corner, and came back out again. Normally, you'll see these things blown off right here. They'll get oil soaked. Everybody will oil the crap out of it. The oil runs down along the bolt and right up into the head of the stock. This one is no exception. It has a little bit of oil soaking. I took a lot of that out when we redid the stock. Okay. So I'm just going to give this a little tap. Now, once you do that, make sure the hammer is free to move. We've changed something. We've put something on the back end. Hammer's free to move, right? So now we'll insert and wind down on this bad boy. Make sure it works, okay? Because we just tightened down on this tang and we changed the relationship of things up inside here. And on some of the older ones where the end grain has been compressed, you can actually, it will screw it up when you get it tight and loose, and then that's a whole different story. That's a whole other thing we got to do. All right, then we can pop this out. There is a front and a back to this thing. So you see to the right, it's narrower than the back part, and that matters. So I always test these dovetails to see whether or not it'll go in easier one way or the other, and it won't even go in this way, but it goes in about halfway that way. So this is the way this particular dovetail wants to be handled. Just kind of drive that over there in the middle. This does not have to be tight. In fact, you don't want it to be, because as this gun heats up, this whole thing expands. So you don't want to, take away its freedom to maneuver. You really don't want to do that. Fore end. And before you put this on, I usually like to make sure I have just a little bit of oil in here. So, because it doesn't get taken off much, so just a little bit of oil. Now, why not the used motor oil? Well, this gun has been sitting now for almost 3 weeks since it was blued. So I don't need to be using motor oils anymore. I can actually use a gun oil, and I'm not getting anything come off in my hand here. Some modern manufacturer stuff won't pass that test. Okay, that goes on there. Then we take the nose metal, a little bit of oil up inside of it. I still had it on the end of my finger. Slide the nose metal on. 2 screws. And again, you don't have to kill this. Now, there's a lot of different ways that nose metal is done on Winchester. Sometimes there's a through bolt that goes through it. It depends. This is the expensive way to do a fore-end hanger. And subsequent methods of doing this were dramatically cheaper. Okay, major edit. Here it is, here it is, here it is. Okay, so I just went looking for this screw. And I brought this up before, but one of the things you got to watch about magnetic crap on a bench, watch that screw right there. Where'd it go? It's sticking on the bottom of this screwdriver. You see that? That's how parts like this ride off the bench. Don't let that be you. All right, so I'm going to put this bad boy in here. That's a neat little trick. I mean, it'll even pick up loading gates. I mean, yes, we could have put the loading gate on before. We'll put it on here in a minute. On this particular gun, when you put the loading gate on does not really matter for a hill of beans. Again, this had a little bit of oil on it, but I'm just going to run a little bit of oil down this because this magazine tube isn't going to see the light of day for a long time. So we're just going to go ahead and put a light coat of oil. Now, I just groused about oil running down, dripping down. No, I was talking about just a little bit of oil, right? And I rubbed it in with my hands. You can see there's a little bit of a sheen to my hand there. That's different than just gratuitous amounts of, I've got a can of ram oil and I intend to use it. Okay. So there's a large hole in the bottom hole. So this does not have to be tight. And the small hole goes on the bottom and the large hole goes on the top, you see? I put that there. And we load this in. Now with long magazine tube springs, one of the things you can do to make a long magazine tube spring easier to insert is just grab a screwdriver or something that's metallic. You can do it with wood, but stick that down the center line of that spring. And then as you put this in, now the spring's capturing it. Can't get all kinky on you. Oh, he said kinky. Okay. There is a threaded side to this and an unthreaded side to this. So we're going to stick the threaded side in, and the reason why we knew that was this screw has threads up at the top of it, so therefore we knew to put the threaded portion of the magazine cap in on top. Okay. And that little clunk you heard was the nose of that fitting down into a small divot in the barrel. And that tied all that up. And I'm telling you, we got the front end of the gun put together. The one thing we did not do, that doesn't really matter when you do it on this particular gun, is just dropping in the loading gate. You just feed that in ever so slightly to the front, push that down so that loads. So you see, you don't load it on top. You don't want it sitting up like that, right? See it sticking out there. Let me get something clear behind it. See how it's sticking out? That's not what you want. You want this to be, you come in ever so slightly and then back up to it. You see how that loads up? That's what you're hunting. You put that screw in and that's it. We have put this gun back together again. Always stroke. Make sure after you've changed something, right? This is a beautiful piece of kit. I'm going to tell you what. It's a gorgeous gun, and well, you know how that goes. Anderson's about to do what I call a novice check. He's not the most proficient lever gun guy in the world, so if he can get through this, then I know we're okay. He's also the counterman at the local gun store, and I trust him implicitly. Safe sectors of fire have been explained to him, and he gets it. So let's watch him operate here. Here you go. Here you go, sir. Stick it in there. Yep. And one more. As we instructed, sir. Outstanding. Nothing like hot brass down the shirt, is there? That was excellent, sir, and I appreciate that. Winchester Model 71 in 348 Winchester. Outstanding. Novice check complete. You'll notice that Anderson was not bashful about stroking this thing, and you have to do it that way or you will short cycle one of these guns. Forward, back, and out. And just let you guys see this beauty in broad daylight. We love it. And as always, it's been a pleasure, and thank you very much for the assistance, because he was dumb enough to stick around and do it.